Folks, the transition between seasons in Oregon is pretty distinct. You go from this beautiful autumn weather, cold but kind of clear, to absolutely bucketing down rain. Not quite freezing cold. It never freezes here in Oregon, not really, but just enough so you can't grow avocados. But oh boy, it was cold. We spent a little time at the beach this weekend, and that is work only for the very committed people. I'll tell you that. But that is not what we're here to talk about. Here, we're going to talk about the OpenTelemetry, Open Agent Management Protocol. And we have Srikanth, former contributor. I'm pointing in the right direction, with us today. Say hi to the people. Tell them what you do for Signos.
Hey everyone, I'm Srikanth. I work for Signos. I mostly work on the metrics and alerts, and I was a maintainer for OpenTelemetry Python SDK, and currently work mostly on the OpAMP.
Very, very cool. And this has been something that, I think a lot of people have been curious about, and I'm excited to talk more about, because we were just having this tail-based sampling conversation, and I was like, man, isn't it possible to do something of that with the agent management protocol? And we'll get to that, but it seems as we start to ask these really big, large scale and highly sophisticated feature questions, like this could be part of the answer. So I wrote up some questions. Some of them are a little silly, but I was just getting started on this topic area. Let me go ahead and just drop, the spec document that we're talking about. And I think this is one thing, might be something that I managed to actually contribute to the project at some point. Is I'd really like to say a more kind of high level doc get released rather than just the spec, which is what's currently out there. But anyway, here's the link if anybody wants to follow those OpenTelemetry docs for the spec. But I want to start with, when looking at this spec, one of the things is you hear the term agent used over and over again. Now, I believe from reading it that we're talking generally about a collector, but is that wrong? Are we talking about an instrumentation agent, or help me with this very basic piece of knowledge?
So the spec is rightly worded in a sense that it is not just the collector. So the protocol, the whole specification and the protocol, while the current focus is around the collector, but the wording and the way that's designed is not specifically for the collector. It could be instrumentation agent, it could be collector, right? It could be anything, any other program, as long as it speaks the protocol. So today the focus is mostly around the collector, but eventually what could happen is that even the SDK can have the OpAMP implementation. Like it's not just the collector configuration that you could dynamically change. It could be a sampling rating at the SDK level as well. So the wording is there, but it's not the collector. It's worded in such a way that it's any telemetry agent that we are talking about.
Yeah, so the idea is that this is supposed to be a standard way, again, not collector specific, to let us do configuration on OpenTelemetry data transmission.
Yes.
And that remains the focus, right? Is the idea of hey, we want to control how this data is being sent. I do have that part right?
Yeah, correct.
Okay, so again, back at the basic questions, this is right now is marked as beta. And I'm curious how you feel about, it getting used in production, what pieces you think are working really well, what pieces you think are still to be defined.
Yeah. So for an end user, I don't think there is really much that they can use it today. It's there's still a lot of the protocol is beta. The specification is parts of it are the beta, and but ultimately for an end user, the implementation is what they concern about, and parts of the implementation in terms of what do end user get. So is there a support in operator? How do they go about controlling today? So that implementation, it is still a very much development work. So I for an end user, there's still a lot of work to do for them to even try it out. So that's what but there's a lot of effort that's going on in getting those things out. But for a vendor, I would say I would hope to see that everybody does something around, like, okay, so are you, like, if you are an observability vendor, they try it out and they, do some POCs and get some feedback from their users, and then like, bring those use cases, so that, in anything, like, make it like, bring those use cases and what problems do you users want to solve, so that the implementation can be can go in that direction.
Yeah, and that's been kind of my understanding too. That like this promises quite a bit, and I think is worth looking at uh, as an end user. What might you see working next year, right? For
Yeah,
live
yeah,
collector config, right? Is worth
yeah,
thinking about.
yeah,
But not something that we want to see. Kind of, hey, don't worry. Like for example, I'll start this now. I didn't even put in a banner for it, but um, the one that has been on my mind is this idea with tail-based sampling. So, very often when you get into a conversation about, and this is background for everybody else, I know you know all this, but, when you get into a conversation about how are traces selected, and you look at, of course, the vast majority of traces that you send are not terribly useful. So you'd like to be a little more focused. And rather than making decisions when a trace starts, wouldn't it be cool if you could make decisions after a trace has been captured? Which are we going to transmit and send? This raises some really basic, like, computer science 202 problems, right? Like, okay, like, how do you save resources if you have to process every single trace anyway, right? And
yeah,
the basic one is, hey, if you make a decision at a particular point, let's say at a collector, about, oh wow, this kind of trace is really interesting, I want to see a bunch more of those, how do you synchronize across the multiple points in your, presumably you're not using one collector, to say, hey, okay, go ahead and change the sample rate on this trace in a smart way. And if you don't have it distributed, then your tail-based sampling becomes a massive bottleneck. If you do have it distributed, then you have this synchronization problem. And so today I would not say, oh, you can totally do this with OpAMP and the collector as it currently stands. But I would say, like, hey, if this is something that you're going to want to cover further down the road, I think it's possible that you will see a solution for this, say in 12 months or in 2 years, right? This is
yeah.
we have a defined system to say, hey, let's communicate about how we want to communicate these. And so you may see this in a little while. So sorry, that was me talking a lot. But what do you want to say about tail-based sampling and the usability thereof?
Yeah, so tailbase, the manage the OpAMP, like the agent management part, has several things, and config management is one of them, and it enables by dynamically giving you, like, by giving you a chance to dynamically change the config. It enables a lot of these use cases, but the issue with that is, like, specifically the tail-based sampling. The issue with this is that it requires a particular kind of setup that when you do this tail-based sampling, you need to have the load balancing export, like an exporter in place, like, so that the same trace goes to, like, same the spans of the same trace goes to the same collector, so that when the sampling decision is made, it's made on full trace instead. So that requires a particular kind of setup, and those implementations, it's not there, like, it's not ready, like, there is, I don't think there is any easy way to do this today. That you cannot, although you have the ability to change the configuration dynamically, a setup that's requires the train panel sampling, it cannot be controlled dynamically.
Yeah, and so you very correctly say, hey, even if the feature was there, right, to do remote config, you would need a very particular architecture to support that correctly,
Yeah,
right? Because the act of saying, hey, I want to sample a bunch of these at this rate, even in the very rough version of, like, we'll take half of them or something, right, is like, no, there's not an easy way to do that with a filtering system that is supposed to be, like, stateless, right? So it's supposed to
yeah,
get the config and nothing else. um but yeah, I saw some discussion at KubeCon about, well, you could introduce a plugin or a processor that is stateful, that says, oh, it goes and checks some database file or something else. But even so, then you'd still need to be handling your traces in a very particular way to have that be useful.
Right.
So, I don't mean to like pour water over everybody's tail-based sampling like dreams. I think maybe there are smarter ways to configure your head-based sampling and smarter ways to configure how you're storing and managing your data overall, such that you stop being quite so stuck on this like, hey, what if I only saved the interesting traces somehow? You know, yeah. But anyway, that was on our mind. So let's talk about some of the things that are definitely supposed to be handled with this in the future. So let's talk about auto updates, where right now maybe you're seeing some implementations with the collector that require these relatively manual processes of like restarting the collector, obviously for new config, but also updating being a little bit effortful currently.
Yeah. So the protocol has something called packages. Those packages are like top level packages are add-ons. Those can be like they can be downloadable. So the way auto updates could work is so you a server offers a new downloadable, like okay, say hey, I got a new version, something like 88, and server offers 88 version. Okay, hey, here is where you get this. So this is the URL where you get where you can go and fetch the package, and the you in the message that the server offers to the contains the downloadable URL checksum that you can verify against all those details, and the it's the agents like whatever you have, whether it's a supervised server or whether it's integrated, it's the job of that to download that, and you and then restart the collector process with the newly downloaded version of the collector. And it can do the like server can like if it, let's say with the newly downloaded a newly updated package that it has detected some errors, server will offer the downgraded version, and if it exists you download it and just run it with the existing some downgraded version.
I see. Yeah. So predicting proactively that, yeah, like a big part of this is going to be applying a certain package to your system.
Right.
So there's also some mention that this was news to me when I was getting read up on this for this week. I didn't really think about, again, I don't think a lot about security, is this thing about credentials management, right? There's some stuff in there about like connection credentials management for stuff like client side TLS certificate revocation.
Yeah.
And that was not stuff that I'd realized was implemented as part of this protocol.
uh yeah, so it was like the agent management, like I mentioned earlier, there are several parts of this agent management, and one is config, one is credentials, and then packages, like each of them, like if you look at the protocol specification you will find them. The way the credential like the management is done is like there are two ways. One is client initiated request, and then the other is server initiated request. In server initiated request, as soon as the client connects to the like the OpAMP server, it can offer, okay, so what's the OpAMP, so there's something, a message called OpAMP connection settings. As soon as the client connects to the server can offer, okay, so here is the settings that you need to use from the next time that you call to me, like anytime. Okay, so now we are connected, and it offers the settings, this TLS certificates that it should use. There's also an endpoint. Okay, so you should connect to the server can okay, let's say the agent like the collector has to send data to some point which is secured, and this server offers, okay, so here is the endpoint, here is the TLS credentials that you should use, you should connect with when you send the data to the endpoint. That is the server initiated flow. The client initiated flow, yeah, and the thing with the server initiated flow is that you could like anytime server thinks that it has to rotate the certificates, it just offers the new certificates. Like there is it like when a client sees that it has received a new connection settings offered, it will follow the new connection settings and then rotate the certificates. In the client initiated certificate request, the flow is same. The like it generates the certificates and then it sends, okay, so here is what I here is my credentials, and then server accepts it. So that's how the the certificates management is done.
I see. So definitely seeing some possible improvements for how we're able to manage secure certificates with those connections.
Yeah.
All right, and let's give a moment here if you want to add any questions in the chat. Looks like we have a few people watching, which is fantastic. Don't want everybody to feel like I'm talking over them. We're good. Fantastic. So I see a few models implemented for like how the communication is working, right? So here's how I had this written down. Maybe this is not great, but can you describe the relationship and communication model between the client and the agent? And how does this model support different implementation scenarios? Like if there's a sidecar, or if we have a plugin, if this is integrated directly in our code.
Right. Yeah. So let's go by one. So when you want to control, so you want to dynamically change certain things, you want to dynamically change the configuration, right? So how do we go about it? So one of the ways to go about it is have so the one ways to do it is integrated. By integrated, I mean so there's a server that offers the dynamic that can offer the dynamic configuration, and then there's a client. Do you could make this client to be part of the same code base that the collector runs. So the client implementation will be part of the same collector binary. The collector, it will be part of the collector binary that runs along with the collector. Like there is no separate process involved. It just runs in the same as a part of the same process, and it communicates with the server. And then whenever it receives a new configuration from the server, it just reinitiates the whole pipeline. So let's say your collector is running, you started without restarting the same process. It just reinitialize, stop the whatever is happening. Hey, I received a new configuration, reset the flush the pipelines, and then start over all over again. So that is integrated, where the client is part of the same binary that the collector is running. And that's one way to do it. And the other way to do is, don't make this keep the and then the issues with this, having the client being part of the integrated, one major issue with that approach is, if a process crashes, like the collector process has crashed, who is going to bring it back up? Who is responsible for bringing, for maybe for because of the invalid configuration, collector process has crashed. Since the client is also part of the collector process, who is going to bring it back up with, who is going to restore it up? So there are these details where the client and the collector will go away at the same time. So there's nobody to keep check on the existence, mandatory existence of the collector process. So that's one issue there. And to avoid that issue, and then you have another model where a client is running as a separate process. This is called as supervisor approach, where you have the collector, you have the supervisor. This supervisor process is what communicating with the server. So it gets the configuration from the server, it's right, and then this supervisor process runs alongside the collector process. And then anytime it receives a new configuration, it writes it to the configuration file, and then restarts the collector process. If collector process for some reason has failed to start, it could be invalid configuration, it could be anything, it tries to revert it back, roll back to the existing earlier configuration that was working, and send the status to the server that, hey, the config that you have sent, I tried to give that configurations to the collector, but it failed to come up, it failed to start. And then it says the error message. In this model, you have, even if the collector crashes for any reason, you still have the supervisor process which is monitoring the collector process, and it will make sure that there is always a collector process, either with the new configuration, either with the old configuration. And so these are the two major models. And how this is implemented in Kubernetes native environment is how, when you talk about the sidecar implementation is one. Like if you basically take the supervisor approach into the Kubernetes environment, you have the sidecar supervisor and then the main collector as a part of the same pod. That there are two containers, supervisor and the collector, and they are the part of the same pod, and then supervisor will be doing the same work that it does but inside the Kubernetes environment.
Yeah, this is a concern we talked about a lot recently, is like knowing that there's actually a process there to pick up your data. And two reasons there. One, obviously we don't want gaps in our observability, we don't want weird blackouts, but also like it may not be that healthy for your process to be trying to report to a collector that's not actually there on the system. So good to worry about. You don't want to sit there trying to write failover directly into your like implementation. So just making sure the process is running is pretty solid. I was going to talk about WebSocket and HTTP transport. I wasn't sure that this is terribly like insightful. Like this is transmission of config data. Like I think we're pretty hip to that. Like we kind of get that. Like I don't want to turn this into our long discussion of WebSocket versus HTTP in general. So I've noticed there's this talk about supervisor process. So what is the role of that supervisor process? And this is kind of what we were talking about keeping the agent up and seeing that the like collector process is running at all times. Is there more to that we want to make sure that people understand as they're exploring this?
Yeah, I think that's mostly like so like it is going to ensure that the collector process is running, and then this is the main process that's communicating with the server, fetching the. So let's say you want to let's talk about the auto updates. Like who is going to do the process of downloading the new version and then restarting the whole thing. So that's the supervisor role there, and then who does the connection management work. So it's the essentially the whole work is like in terms of management work is done by the supervisor there.
Got it. So I guess my last question is just about like what you see as the immediate future, the next couple of quarters for this. Are you looking to see maybe some implementations of a toolkit to do like remote collector config with this, or do you think it's going to be a little longer for that, or are we kind of waiting on some vendors to create some more complex demonstrations of using the tool?
The so what I believe will so there has been some a lot of effort going on into this in operator and in like generic collector side. So there is a good progress that has been made. What I hope to see in couple of next quarters is that you as an end user you will get to see some sort of implementation where you can dynamically change the collector configuration from you get to see a UI where the current configuration of the collectors is given, and then you can modify and then trigger the config update that it actually goes to the collector, and then whatever you decide to see dynamically control that as an end user you will see it happen in operator in like regular collector in both yeah, that's what I see the like this is going.
I see. Yeah, no, I think that's sort of what we're all hoping for, right? Is that like within your telemetry tool, within your APM tool, you're able to say like, oh, I want to see a little more of this. I want to filter out things like this, and you're able to just feed it down as config.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Oh, exciting next year. Maybe by the next KubeCon NA, we'll be talking about practical demonstrations of it. All right. Well, we have covered our half hour. We've gotten a lot of good information here. I'll be doing a write-up on this, so hopefully give me a little help when we do that to talk about this. I think especially I want to talk about this in terms of the tail-based sampling world and kind of where we're at and where we see is the next year of development. I definitely don't want to I don't want to give the impression that either tail-based sampling or config that is automatically shared across a whole swarm of agents is like going to happen or something that you need to have working to be able to do OpenTelemetry at scale. So, we'll be continuing that conversation. Did you have final stuff? Did you want people to get involved? There is a SIG, I believe, for the
Yeah.
OpAMP that people can join.
Yeah. So there's a SIG, and then there's a meeting that happens bi-weekly, and it will be today in Pacific time. For you, it starts in sometime, and it happens bi-weekly. And then there's a lot of work to do. You can join the SIG, and there's also Slack channel there. You can come say hi if you are interested in contributing at any sort of contribution. It does not have to be code. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I really encourage people to check out the SIG calendar for OpenTelemetry. There's some great stuff there. Oh yeah, it's in like 2 hours. So if you're interested in checking it out, and I will share the link to that calendar system because yeah, everything needs help. You do not have to be some master hacker to be able to contribute a lot. And see me tomorrow about this time at the collector SIG for sure, where I'll be trying to get a few more filter functions working and a little more general purpose. All right, folks, that's been our time. We will be back next week with more stuff about OpenTelemetry. We are on the Signos team. Check out Signos if you're interested in the dashboard for your OpenTelemetry data. But in general, do try out OpenTelemetry and the open world of monitoring. It's got a lot to offer you. Thank you so much. We will be back next week.